So it says here from The Sun that justice served? Gypsy Rose Blanchard admits life sentence, quote, would have been fair after serving just 7 years for Munchausen mum murder plot. Now, mum, obviously being this is I think a source from the UK, but I found this a little bit interesting of a title, so we're going to check this one out and see what it says. It's been over 2 years since Gypsy Rose Blanchard was released from prison after hatching a schmurder plot against her own mum. Mom. Gotta love the UK. I don't have the accents like they do, but mum. The 34-year-old, oh, here we go with this, victim of proxy, which is not true, was released in December 2023 after serving a 7.5 years of a 10-year sentence in Missouri federal prison for the I don't think she was in a federal prison. I don't think this is accurate, but whatever. Not too many mainstream media sources are. So far, the Munchausen narrative, yeah, that's not true, and she was not in federal prison for the second-degree murder of her mother, Dee Dee Blanchard. So, not going to put too much stock into this article, but let's see what else it says. But while many sympathize with Gypsy Rose after her traumatizing childhood, again, that... Are we going to have to go over every single little sentence that says? She herself believes she should have spent longer behind bars. I'm not sure where they're getting that from, but I'd be interested to see how they came up with that. So once again, this kind of the things that I've read on this so far that support her are not true, and it's also a possibility that the things going against her may not be true either. So whoever's running the sun over there in the UK, you may have the sun shine in the right direction, because I don't think you're getting your information very straight. But let's see if this actually adds up to any scrutiny. In June 2015, she and her then boyfriend, Nicholas Godejohn, conspired to murder Claudine Dee Dee Blanchard, which we already know. Godejohn, who fatally poked Dee Dee in her Missouri home while Gypsy hid in the toilet. In the toilet? I mean, wow. I mean, I guess that's just maybe the British terminology for hiding in the bathroom. I don't think Gypsy was physically in the toilet, but you know what I mean. Again, this source is questionable to begin with, even though the Sun is supposed to be fairly well known, fairly reputable. I guess not. But if Gypsy was in the toilet, that's a new one. But I'm not sure if I'm going to embrace that just yet. But you never know. Was found guilty. Well, actually, no. She pled guilty. So, no, I'm sorry. Is this for Nick? No, he was found guilty of first-degree murder on July 5th, 2016, and received a life sentence, which he is still serving at Potosi Correctional Center. Gypsy accepted a plea bargain of the century, and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, but now says she understands why people believe she should have gotten a life sentence like Godejohn. Speaking to Paul Brunson on the We Need to Talk podcast, Gypsy says, I feel like if I would have spent the rest of my life in prison, that would have been fair for the crime that was committed. Now, do I also understand where the prosecution was coming from by offering me mercy? I do. Well, of course. Of course, Gypsy, because it benefits you. So of course you're gonna see it their way, or see where they were coming from. But I have yet to hear. I mean, I would be very surprised if Gypsy. I mean, I'm not sure if this is a red herring or something that she's just putting out there. But if she really thinks like she deserved a life sentence, then that kind of really debunks her entire narrative all this time. If all these abuse stories were true, then why would you think you deserved a life sentence? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, you can't have that both ways. So I'm appreciative for the second chance that I've been given. I bet Nick wish he could say the same. But I understand where people are coming from with feeling like the sentence didn't match the crime. That is 100% correct. And when it came to this crime, even if you wanted to, show the levels of responsibility, you got Nicholas Godejohn, who actually, carried out the crime physically. But, I think, like, I've seen, and I've given I did a video giving endless examples of this, where the person that actually planned the crime, the mastermind, there's one guy that actually got the ultimate penalty when he hired his best friend and another friend to unalive his wife. His name is Mark Sievers. He was 1,100 miles away when that murder was committed, and the husband that planned it, got the ultimate penalty, while the other two guys got life sentences. But let's just pretend that, for a second, that the playing field has been leveled for both Nick and Gypsy. If Nick gets a life sentence for his role, then I think Gypsy, even though she didn't have an instrumentally hands-on, role considering this murder, I think should have been, just as serious of a sentence as Nick. Because, you know what I mean? Like I said, you have one person that elaborately planned it and basically groomed an autistic man for 2 years to commit it, and then you have the man that actually committed it. And I think, in a way that is kind of even though in my opinion, I think the one that planned it, is the main reason why this happened, if not the sole reason why this happened. Because if you took her out of the equation, Dee Dee Blanchard would not have been murdered by Nick. Nick had no reason to do it other than at Gypsy's behest. So, I think the playing field should have been leveled. And if she really does agree with that, that's hilarious. So, anyways, since Gypsy was a child, she was led to believe by her mother that she had several illnesses, including leukemia and muscular dystrophy. Okay, so they're just going to regurgitate some of her claims at this point, the debunked ones especially, The microdeletion that she has, I'm pretty sure everyone's done a pretty extensive research on that right now. While it might have given some confusion until they found, the microdeletion diagnosis, there was especially things like failure to thrive, where it caused problems with her eating. She spent a month in an eating, everyone talks about the feeding tube. Every surgery that has been listed in her medical records has been deemed necessary, and it's been done extensive with research. The feeding tube was essentially, she spent a month in an eating clinic, where they keep you for about a month and see how you're chewing and swallowing your food, and to see if it's necessary, where if there's enough of a side effect that's going on where you're not getting the proper nutrients, can't feed yourself, nourish yourself properly, they would, turn to a feeding tube. And no one's going to get a feeding tube placed in them because a charismatic mom walks into a hospital and says, give my kid a feeding tube. That's not how it works. There has to be medical reasoning to back that up. So again, we're not going to go over that for the 100th time, but you know what I mean? It's I've been in the medical field. There's no place, let alone a place I would several times just put someone under the knife because their mommy tells them to. Mommy's not a physician. And then, like I said, the medical community and getting approved for a surgery, there's many facets of the medical community you have to go through. Not just a physician to agree with this, but they also need to be approved by the insurance company that's going to not only pay for the services, but their physicians and their adjusters and everyone involved on their side on the aisle have to also align with that diagnosis and need to see on paper the diagnosis and the reasoning, the medical reasoning, not because mommy said so, of why she would need a feeding tube or whatever surgery is listed there. So out of her supporters that actually believe her story, are any of them going to be honest with themselves and actually say, what, I'm in the medical community, and as much as I support Gypsy, there's absolutely no way that would happen. Not to mention, if it did, where's all the lawsuits? How come there's not one lawsuit against any of these supposed doctors that perform dozens of these surgeries, unlawfully, unnecessarily, and commit all this medical abuse on her? You would figure there'd be a lawsuit somewhere. There would be massive lawsuits. How come no one's reached out to Gypsy saying, hey, I'll take your case pro bono, or hey, let's go, sue this doctor, that doctor, sue this facility? That's because there's no one to sue. There's no one to sue for anything. Everything on her medical records was deemed necessary. And I believe it was 4 procedures, not dozens. Having your feeding tube changed is not a surgery, like she was trying to insinuate, on Dr. Phil. But anyways, let's keep reading. The 34-year-old was also, at times, forced to breathe from an oxygen tank and even ride around in a wheelchair, although she did not need either. Well, first of all, her failure to thrive did cause her to need the wheelchair at times, and I don't believe she was forced. And I'm not sure about this whole oxygen tank thing. I think the only thing I've seen on her is a CPAP machine. But I don't know. I haven't heard much, if anything, about an oxygen tank. But, correct me if I'm wrong. Moving on. Dee Dee suffered from an undiagnosed facetious disorder known as Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Wait. That doesn't make any sense. She suffered an undiagnosed Munchausen by proxy syndrome? Wait, that literally doesn't make any sense. How can you be suffering from something you haven't been diagnosed with? This is some amazing journalism, I guess, because that just contradicts itself right there. First of all, you can't diagnose somebody with something posthumously, and secondly, there was no diagnosis beforehand. It's like you can't say someone's suffering from something that you just admitted that this article admits was undiagnosed. I can't with some of these media sources. And again, it's just like I've seen nothing but possible, if not definite, misinformation and also regurgitation of the same old narratives that Gypsy has put out along with her cohorts, where those affected fabricate illnesses or injuries or actually cause them to others to gain attention, sympathy, or other benefits. Now, while I do believe they were trying to gain attention, sympathy, and benefits regarding the situation, I don't think she was inflicting anything onto Gypsy. At least that's not what I've heard. Now, she might have exaggerated claims and told people certain things, but she wasn't inducing anything, as far as I remember, onto Gypsy. She wasn't giving her medication she didn't need. I mean, she claimed she did, but again, it's just I think her mom had to put a lock on that medicine cabinet because Gypsy was going after the good stuff, and we know that because when she left to go to the hotel room with Nick after the schmurder was done, she went to go get some Zanny the Nanny and some of those painkillers that feel so very good, even though the behavior in the hotel room is not indicative of her being on those rugs, because they don't make you hyper and laughing and giggly and energetic and whatever. She would have been what's that, Nick? You have a brownie I can have? Can I eat it? You want to eat it? You know what I mean? She would have been out of it. She wouldn't sit there and be laughing and giggling and full of energy, ready to eat brownies. But anyways, allegedly, Dee Dee frequently ripped off charitable organization to fly her and her daughter across the country to concerts, celebrity meet and greets, galas, and even to Disney World with all expenses paid. Yeah, yet Gypsy claims that she's never traveled before, she's never been in the pool, she's never had any type of childhood, she's never got to go anywhere or do anything, she's been confined her entire life. Yeah, she's had more trips and more opportunities to travel than most people do in their entire lifetime, so it couldn't have been that bad, Gypsy. I would have loved to do stuff like that, but, that's just for another day, I guess. In the podcast, Gypsy explained how her mother's lies started when she was just 8 years old. Okay, but again, I would like to reiterate back to when her lawyers first came into the fold and came into the pictures and basically said if this trial if this case went to trial for Gypsy, she'd be doing life in prison. That's Mike Stanfield's own words, that they basically had no defense to mount for Gypsy, and that they essentially made up or came up with this Shabuse narrative. And also what corroborates this, that he used this specifically for dirty lawyer tactics in a court system, and also colluded with the media to make sure it stuck, is the fact that listen to the jail calls after Gypsy's arrest. And keep in mind, Dee Dee Blanchard's no longer alive. She told everybody, including her own lawyers and her own family, including Rod and Christy, I love my mother. I would have never done this. I mean, she was a little bit overprotective, but that's it. No, Nick did this. That's it. Nick is this dark, scary man, and she's firing on all cylinders with this baby voice. By the way, you know what? They got the man that did it. Yeah, he was my boyfriend, and then he came because he wanted me to come live with him. It's just there's nothing about Shabuse in any of this, and why would she lie about that? And why would you not use that as your defense? Why would Mike Stanfield say that she doesn't have a defense, but, you could have gone with a self-defense, or, some kind of maybe crime of passion, considering all the Shabuse that you say was going on, but none of that happened. It was just something the lawyer came up with. They colluded with the media. The judge was irresponsible and didn't put a gag order on this. And then you also had a re-election bid going on with the DA and didn't want to take a chance of looking like he was going after a so-called victim. And then you have the plea deal of the century that, came out of that cocktail of BS. So again, it's just like it always comes back to lawyers basically saying that she would have ended up life in prison. I mean, again, he said he had no mounted defense for her. Well, why not the Shabuse defense? I don't know. Ask him. He made the claims, not me. So the initial story that my mom told to my family was I went into the hospital, then upon having surgery, I had a seizure on the operating room table that left me paralyzed, she recalls. And then Gypsy goes on. Then she goes on to tell doctors that I was paralyzed since birth, even though there's pictures and there's all these people that had seen me grow up walking. Yeah, but again, there's got to be, if she's going to make that claim and then there's going to be further action taking with Gypsy's case in the medical community, I'm pretty sure if she was paralyzed since birth, then there would have to be some documentation a doctor or surgeon would have to see in order to continue any further treatments or any, future surgeries. They're not just going to take a mother's word and mother's word alone and just run with that. That is one of the most irresponsible things a provider would ever do. And again, if they were truly just going by what mommy said, there would be a myriad of lawsuits right now that would have been happening or would have happened long time ago. But you want to know what? There's no lawsuits because none of this happened. Anything that had to do with Gypsy and needing a surgery had to do with microdeletion and was warranted at that time. In fact, before like I said, with the feeding tube, she was in an eating clinic for a month before they decided to put that in there. She had failure to thrive. It had a lot to do with that. Okay. Then she goes on to tell doctors that okay, we saw that. Gypsy described Dee Dee as a true Southern mom and said she came across as sweet to people with an untrained eye. Okay, let's see what else it says. Through one period in her life, Gypsy claims that Dee Dee had even buttered up a doctor and developed a friendship with them, suggesting that it made it easy to push things over the line. Again, there's no doctor that I can think of, whether you're, quote, friends with them or not, that is going to put their license and career on, into jeopardy just to facilitate a charismatic mom. They're still going to follow the rules and follow the books and follow HIPAA laws to make sure that if there's any, again, it is not easy to get approved for any surgery. It doesn't matter what it is. There's some people that I've known that, needed a surgery like, tenfold, and the diagnosis has already been there for who knows how long, and they still had to jump through several hoops and facets throughout the medical community, whether it was insurance related or related to the diagnosis itself or needing a second opinion on the diagnosis before they would actually get approved for that surgery. It's the opposite. It's very difficult most of the time. You get denied the first couple of times, but to say that they were handing them out to Gypsy like candy because mommy was charismatic is ridiculous, and anyone that supports her in the medical community that actually believes that narrative needs to go back to their training and re-look at HIPAA laws, because they know just as much as I do that none of that would be happening. And again, where's the lawsuits if it was? I'm just gonna leave it at that. So from the age of 9 up until her early 20s, Gypsy was fitted with a feeding tube, which she described as an open hole in her stomach. Again, she spent a month in an eating clinic before that happened. They didn't just put it in there because Dee Dee said so. It was warranted. Okay? She spent a month up there before they put it in there until they decided, the doctors decided, not Dee Dee, the doctors decided it was necessary. And it was related to the microdeletion. There's a vast array of symptoms and side effects and different parts of your body that go wrong or need assistance. And like I said, failure to thrive has a myriad of different side effects and just symptoms altogether. So from the age of 9 up until her early 20s, okay, now she is constantly haunted by a scar which serves as a reminder, with it looking like a, quote, second belly button. Okay, I don't think that really haunted over a feeding tube. I mean, I guess if that, again, I don't believe that she's being haunted by anything. Because, like I said, she spent a month in that eating clinic before they put it in her, and it was there to help her. And then when it wasn't needed anymore, it was taken out. I was mostly fed through the feeding tube with Pediasure or Insure, which is like a supplemental nutrition shake. Yeah, we know what that is. She tells Paul. So every 6 months, I'd have to have it changed, which is very uncomfortable. They don't put you under anesthesia or anything for that. Correct, because it's not surgery. It's just a changing of a feeding tube. It's a pretty basic thing that's done. So again, if you're going to say that changing a feeding tube is abuse, you're wrong. It's a very standard procedure, and it is not it might be a little uncomfortable, yes, but they're not going to put you under anesthetics because of a little bit of discomfort. I think you'll be all right. Anyways, moving on. We're going to go on with this again. Sadly, Gypsy had to endure many more procedures and even had her salivary glands unnecessarily removed. Once again, it was not unnecessary. She did have a drooling issue due to the microdeletion. That was one of the 4 procedures that were done, and it was not something they decided overnight. Again, she revealed the trick her mother to make her, quote, excessively drool in order to convince doctors she needed the procedure performed. And there's a little crash course on Munchausen by proxy. But again, you can't diagnose with something on someone that's, not here anymore and they're deceased. You can't get their side of the story on anything. So, again, I don't know where people get off thinking that you could posthumously diagnose something with, like Munchausen's. But, whatever. I guess the people that write this truly want to believe this nonsense, but whatever. Hopefully the people that with more than a brainstem actually see right through it, which most of us do. So, moving on. My mom would put Aura gel before we would go into the doctor's appointment on my mouth to make me drool, she explains. First of all, Aura gel doesn't last too long. It wouldn't make you drool that excessively. You have to apply it like every 5 minutes kind of thing. So, I call BS on that. So, upon examination, the doctor saw me drool. It's excessive drooling. There's a way to take care of that, so let's remove the salivary glands. No one's just going to see you drool a couple of times and then just go right to salivary gland removal. I'm sorry. They're not going to make a stretch that far. They're going to do something like putting you into an eating clinic for about a month, which they did. So that's what determined on how to get that feeding tube, or why they put the feeding tube in. It's not because mom put Oragel in the mouth. Again, that's a cute little story, but that does not stand up to scrutiny, not an ounce of it. Gypsy revealed that her mom would convince her to stay quiet in the appointments by rewarding her with a trip to Toys R Us. I mean, she claims this was going on to age 23. Was she really, screaming to go to Toys R Us when she was, 20-something years old? I highly doubt that, but you know what? Whatever. We're in a sideways, backwards world when it comes to Gypsy, so okay, let's keep it going. She explained that doctor's trips were part of her normal routine, and she said she would stay in her wheelchair unless she spotted the opportunity to, quote, test the limits. Whatever that means. So if she left the house to go to the grocery store for a second, I would get up and walk around. I would test the limits. Not really. I mean, how many videos do we see in the foyers that she made for Nick where she's outside on her own, she's walking around the house, she's shooting really long, elaborate videos several times a day in each and every nook and cranny of the house? I don't think that was testing the limits, and she didn't seem too fearful of what was going to happen. So, yeah, just saying. Even in the foyers, seeing how much freedom she had in her own house, having a phone, having a laptop, having access to being outside. Again, we have to turn the world upside down to believe the contrary. So my leg strength wasn't great, obviously, because I hadn't been walking like normal, but just to kind of feel like, hey, I'm walking. Yeah, but like I said, there was no atrophy in her legs whatsoever. She had a leg test done, and she had a normal muscle. She had normal muscle mass and muscle in her legs. So it's just, again, this doesn't hold up to anything. Gypsy might have been feigning a lot of this. In fact, I forget one doctor. She was actually not just one doctor, but I think by more than one, there was a suspecting of maligning or malingering. Which again, whether it was at the behest of Dee Dee or Gypsy or both, Gypsy was aware of what she was doing. That's where maligning and malingering comes from, is you're doing it on purpose. Not because mommy convinced you, and when you're able to walk. You're aware when you're able to walk. She even admitted to Nick she knew how to walk and knew it, and even kept some of it from her mother and exaggerated it. So that's her words, not mine. So, despite Gypsy knowing that she could walk, her warped reality dragged on as she became increasingly isolated and reliant on her mom. Now, again, she had access plenty to the outside world on dating profiles, Facebook, an account that she shared with her mom, sure. But again, she had a cell phone. She could have called her dad at any time. She had a laptop. She had, people and friends in the neighborhood she could have contacted. She had, like she was able to go to Dan Glidewell's, like seemingly without a problem, until his friends got shaded out by her and said, yo, come get your girl, Dee Dee. But other than that, yeah. The rest of that, of saying like she was some isolated person, had no access to anything, is a bunch of nonsense. So, as Gypsy became older, she became stronger and questioned her mother about her condition. I don't know. I think both of them, if there was like any trickery going on, if there was, like I believe there was, I think both of them were equally on this. Because, I guarantee Gypsy loved all those free trips and attention and getting to, cosplay a child that goes to the Special Olympics. Pretty gross behavior, just regardless of who's responsible for it. When you're around the age of, like, especially the age that she was, like going into her late teens and 20s, you become self-aware. And one thing about Gypsy is she's very self-aware of what's going on, whether she says so or not. Because like she's pretty well spoken, her stories are very elaborate, whether they're true or not, and when she wants something, she makes sure she gets it. Case in point, she's got a baby with Ken right now, and that happened so fast. All I read about was her and Ryan had like split up kind of thing, and then there was some baby involved. I'm like, wait, whose baby is it? Like, I knew her and Ken. When I found out about her and Ken getting back together, it's like, wait, already she's preggo? Amazing stuff. It's just like, I don't find that coincidental at all. I think she did not want Ken getting away again as quickly as he did the first time, because one thing that I think attracted Gypsy so much to Ken was the fact that he had the ability to say goodbye. He had the ability to say, Gypsy, I want nothing to do with you. Women like that. Someone that'll actually, not be a complete simp for you like Ryan Anderson is. But anyways, let's just keep going. Let's see what else it says. I did many times. It always resulted in some form of bringing all of it back to her, like you don't love me, she says. Anytime that I would bring up the fact I'm not as sick as you're saying, it was always an argument. And then I felt like I had lost a mom and I didn't want to lose my mom. Okay. If you want to say I went along with it, okay. Well, no. You yourself said you went along with it, so we're not saying anything. But look at the reasons behind it. I mean, if you're going to put that narrative that, Dee Dee was out scamming, you were a willing participant. You have a child that wants her mom to love her. Again, you were like in your 20s at this time. You were not a child. Okay? You weren't. You were self-aware of what was going on, and by like testimony from the neighbors and observation from the neighbors and other things that we've heard, you and Dee Dee weren't exactly getting along. Dee Dee was actually researching homeless shelters and shelters for the youth and places for you to go. So it's like, if she was trying to trap you at the house so badly, then why was Dee Dee looking for alternative places for you to go? Sounds like she was the one that was kind of sick of you being there. But, she's not here to unfortunately give her side of the story. So hence we have to look into this ourselves, because Gypsy, in her own words, said that she is a pathological liar. She was trained to lie, or, it doesn't, regardless, it doesn't matter like what the circumstances are as to how you became that way. The thing is, if you're going to sit there and truly be self-aware and admit that you're a pathological liar, then you're basically saying, don't trust anything I say unless there's some corroboration. You know what I mean? That's what I do as far as Gypsy's case goes. I look for corroborating evidence, because she's left me no choice at this point. You know what I mean? Other people could just believe what she says blindly, but she's contradicted herself in her own documentaries, her own, podcasts, everything else. It's just like, I don't even know where to begin with it. There's so much of it. Maybe one day when I have absolutely nothing to do, I will find every single contradiction I can find. But that's going to be a long list to search over many different, podcasts, appearances, documentaries, movies, whatever, what have you, to add all that up into one cohesive argument. But maybe I'll get around to it one day. You know what I mean? So let's see. Gypsy continued to be a victim of abuse until she discovered that the lies were even deeper than she could imagine. I think she was fully aware of what was going on. I don't believe the victim of abuse narrative. If so, why wasn't that used as a defense going to trial with it? Why would her own lawyers say if it does go to trial, she's going to serve life in prison? I'm pretty sure we know why. But anyways, moving on. After going through her mother's purse, she discovered that her whole identity had been a lie. Again, it's just like one thing that we saw, especially after, the 10 months prior to Dee Dee's unaliving, was that Gypsy was signing her own medical records. So I'm pretty sure she knew what her birth date was, what have you. Maybe Dee Dee was trying to exaggerate it, or, to keep her younger and to keep her eligible for certain pediatrics or younger services. Again, but I think they were thick as thieves. I think Gypsy was perfectly aware of what her mom was doing, and they teamed up for this. What's the motivation? 2 disability checks. Not having to work, going to Disney World. Plenty of motivation to do it. So anyways, I found my health insurance card, and it said my birthday was 1991. That would make me 18/19, not 15, she explains. Okay, whatever, that's fine. But again, I do believe they were both in on those theatrics when it goes to the deception of the age and things related to her, medical history. Realizing she was an adult, Gypsy attempted to escape, but Dee Dee forcefully restrained her. No. What happened was Dan Glidewell's friends basically called Dee Dee, creeped out, thinking that she was a minor or something like that, because again, she's kind of like pipsqueaked and she looks very young. She's, not even 5 feet tall, and they were creeped out and they said, "Yo, Dee Dee, come get your girl." Anyways, she explained she took a dog leash and clipped it and tied it to a pair of handcuffs and then put it around the bed. Okay, again, it's a interesting story, but I think she's she probably borrowed stuff like this from situations like the Turpin sisters and stuff like that, which something like that was actually going on, unlike what Gypsy's claiming. Again, if that really happened, why wouldn't you take that to trial and present that to a jury? It's like I still don't get that. Why would Mike Stanfield think she would serve life in prison if it went in front of a jury, when apparently you've got all this testimony, you've got all these claims that, all that abuse was going on? Why was that not used as a defense? But then, again, why would you say you have no defense when you're basically giving reasons as to what could be used as a defense? So again, that just baffles the mind. Okay, so she explained she took a dog leash. Okay, she put bells on the doors and then eventually put a padlock on the door. This just sounds like more regurgitation from the act and, some of Gypsy's claims from over the years, which, change depending on who she's talking to. But anyways, moving on. Blacked out all the windows with, window tint. And that's when she started hitting me. Okay. No, that's not the reason she blacked out the windows. But okay, we're going to go with that again. Even Ken told me that wasn't the reason. It was to prevent, I guess, neighbors from seeing Gypsy walking around the house. And not because of anything else about hitting her. But whatever, we're going to shift the goalposts. We're going to make different claims. I'm not sure if that's the son or Gypsy, given the inconsistencies. But regardless, it's there. Do with it what you will. This is the biggest issue with Gypsy, is credibility and lack of accountability, and she wonders why people continue to make videos about her, because again, she is always going to be a potential future danger as long as she still has this delusion that, hey, I don't have to take accountability for anything. And believe me, her version of accountability is not accountability, especially when you're going to do things, not even just a few months ago, of her, joking and mocking and basically doing this we listen and we don't judge thing and saying, my mom. She didn't even say Nick did it. She said she did it. I'm like, wow, maybe she accidentally told the truth. A year later, Gypsy secretly began dating Godejohn after signing up to a Christian dating site, Nicholas Godejohn. After 2 years of speaking online, they arranged to both coincidentally sit together at a movie theater, which Dee Dee took Gypsy to. Now, again, this is about to get to something interesting. But Dee Dee got a bad vibe from Nick and said he gave her the creeps. That happened in the act, but if there was creepy vibes, why would you take a picture of them sitting next to each other at the movie theater? Why would she invite him to come sit next to them for the movie? They changed that narrative in the act, obviously, by acting like he was a creep and get away from us and who is that and all this other stuff. Again, that was just misinformation, because we saw the pictures that Dee Dee took of the two of them at the movie theater before they went to the bathroom to attempt to do something else. And I say attempt because Nick for some reason couldn't finish the deed. You know what I mean? Whether it was impotency or what the case was, I think it might have been related to his autism. But, you know, again, it's hard to understand. Like Becca Scoop said, she made a really good point a while ago about this. Like, for people to come out and say that Nick was a rapist and all this other stuff, it's like, first of all, like, you would have to really, like, do a deep dive into, like, someone with autism and their outlook on anything schmexual, or like what their schmexuality is like, which again, that would require somebody like in that field and talking to Nick and understanding him, and if he's willing to be open about that. You know, to judge a man like that, you know, especially based on, you know, surface level, you know, knowledge that's available to the public, is ridiculous. And, you know, according to even Gypsy herself, the guy could barely even build a tower. Let's just say that. But apparently he's some rapist. Can't have it both ways. I'm sorry. You can't. But, okay, so she was left furious after she moved a few seats away from him, but Gypsy stayed put. Again, he was, from everything I understood, was not only invited to come sit with them, but Dee Dee was taking pictures of them. Despite the disastrous trip, the pair continued to talk and had even knocked around the idea of schmurder. No, it was Gypsy that entertained that idea for over 2 years, and Nicholas was not only skeptical, but would also try to find alternatives to the whole schmurder plan, and even consulted his ex-girlfriend about, like, hey, is my current girlfriend crazy? Is schmurder, like, you know, a really bad idea in this particular situation? And, you know, he got his opinion from her, and I guess, you know, the whole self-defense, come to the rescue, slay the dragon, you know, sort of narrative, the whole Rapunzel thing and all the damsel in distress stuff that, you know, Gypsy really loved in the whole Disney realm. Yeah, I think that's sort of where it ended up. But, you know, that's just what I see, and if you see it a different way, that's perfectly okay. We can agree to disagree. It became a serious thought after the movie theater, she says. That's when I started to realize, like, no matter what I knew, I will never be able to be my own person, never have my own freedom, never made my own choices, I'll never get married. Well, I mean, you found freedom just in that moment when you were able to leave the movie theater where Dee Dee was and go to a bathroom long enough, unattended, and, you know, not even checking on you, to, you know, get into schmexual schmintercourse inside of a bathroom, a public one of all places. I don't know. If you can pull that off, I think leaving the house shouldn't be too much of an issue. And then on top of that, let's pretend you can't leave the house, you can't go to the police. Why don't you call Rod or Christy? Did you even attempt? You know, again, people say, Gypsy already tried to leave. She already tried. She tried maybe once or twice. And again, this, like, Dee Dee was in the throes of diabetes. She was in no physical condition to go running down the road like Indiana Jones trying to, you know, track her daughter down. That wasn't the case. There were circumstances that, you know, like, for example, like, again, Dan Glidewell, his friends said, you know, to Dee Dee, come get your girl. They called her and said, you know, you come get your girl here. You know, she's pursuing her married friend. Not really a good look for him, and not really a good idea, because, you know, I mean, Gypsy was very persistent on Dan Glidewell. She's persistent on any man she wants to be with. Again, what Gypsy wants, Gypsy gets. She's always been like that. So, and you know, it also makes sense as to why she targets men like Ryan Anderson or Nicholas Skodejan, men with likely low self-esteem and low self-worth, not much previous experience, you know, with any other women or relationships. That's a good target for her, you know? That's a good way to groom somebody into doing stuff, like, you know, that you normally wouldn't do, and do your bidding altogether. But no, it's just like, again, she could have had her freedom anytime she wanted. She was free to make hundreds of videos for Nick, no problem. She was free to go outside and, you know, show Nick videos about being outside. But again, where was it one call to Rod or Christy? There was not one call to Rod or Christy if she truly wanted to get out of the house. That was an option. So basically saying, you know, I did try to leave the house once, so try again. You think Dee Dee was going to come running after a cab while she's in the throes of diabetes in the middle of the night? I don't think so. But, you know, you have to really dive a leap forward to be like, yep, schmurder was okay, even though you could have left the house, no problem. But anyways, moving on. She adds, I didn't want her unalived necessarily. If she would have went to prison, I would have been all the happier. There's a problem with that. Gypsy would have been to prison right alongside her because at the time of Dee Dee's unaliving, Gypsy was under investigation right along Dee Dee when it came to all the false medical claims to get those free, services, donations, and monetization, what have you. So I don't think she was waiting for that investigation to take course because, again, Gypsy would have been going to prison right alongside her. So let's just put that out there. At this point, Gypsy was 23 years old, exactly, keep that in mind, but still felt trapped inside her mother's house. I don't believe that. I don't, especially when she had one phone call to make to Rod or Christy, who fully supported her and wanted to help her. There was no excuse why she didn't call one of them. None. Her and Godejohn came up with a plan to schmurder Dee Dee, but Gypsy claims they didn't discuss how he would carry out the act, and that's not true. Not only did they discuss it, but Gypsy provided him with the actual method, the weapon, and everything in between. Unlocking the door to let him into the house, her going into the bathroom to make sure she can alibi herself in the bathroom somehow, even though all I have to do is investigate her text messages and that playing. I think she went in there to, as a safety net to play victim in case Dee Dee overpowered him in some, some chance that happened. You know what I mean? That, 1 in a million chance that Dee Dee could have overpowered Nick, but, and that way Gypsy could say, hey, this scary boyfriend came in here, attacked my mother, and I went into the bathroom because, I was scared and protecting myself. But again, all they had to do was look through her text messages and her correspondences, and that victim narrative would have went way out the window. So, anyways, let's continue. The pair went back to a hotel nearby, and Gypsy, quote, self-medicated after developing an addiction to schmopiates. Again, this kind of correlates with the fact that Dee Dee Blanchard had to put a padlock on the medicine cabinet because I think Gypsy was dipping into the good stuff. So, there's that. She recalls, quote, I was very high after the fact, ordering pizza, giggling, laughing, not a care in the world. See, when it comes to the rugs that she was talking about, once again, like the Zanny the Nanny and the, painkillers that she was talking about, you would not be giggling, laughing, being energetic, charismatic, and, doing whatever it is you're doing. Not a care in the world, maybe, but you'd be very tired. And like I've seen, I know what the effects of those rugs are, especially being in the medical field. And I once myself was on painkillers after a car crash. Not recommended. 0 stars out of 10. So, yeah. Again, her behavior was not indicative of being, quote, high. And even if she was, it's just like, it doesn't exonerate anything. It still sounds like she was there having quite a nice little time. And there's nothing that shows otherwise. It shows, if she didn't call anybody in distress or text anybody else. Again, her stepdad and her stepmom and Rod were 1 phone call away this whole time. This entire incident, before, after, and during, whatever. And she chose not to call them once. So, you know what I mean? That will always baffle me by her saying I had no options. But what about your entire side of the family on your dad's side? Like, what? Why? What? You just forgot they existed? Okie doke. The pair were arrested 5 days later on June 14th after Gypsy logged into her mother's Facebook and posted a status reading that B blank 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 H is dead. And there was another one much more disturbing after that, and I think it was to thwart the investigation, not because she wanted her mom to be found. No. If she wanted her mom to be found, she could have made an anonymous call to the police saying, hey, this address, there's a body over there, or there's an incident over there, do a welfare check. You could have just called the police and had them go to the house, with exactly what I just said. But once again, it's like, I think those were red herrings that she was posting on Facebook to make it look like someone came in there or Nick came in there and, not only brutalized Dee Dee, but also, quote, kidnapped the daughter and did, grapey things to to the daughter. So again, either that was a framing for Nick, where Nick typed that in because again, like Nick is, in the same trail as her, and she could probably, she tried to frame it that way, that she was like, they're against her will kind of thing. But again, it's like, all I had to do was speak to Nick's parents, and they're just like, no, it's like they've been talking for quite a long time. Look into the audit of all the text messages as well. These two were dating and they were in love. At least Nick was in love with her, and there was no kidnapping or coercion about this. But I think that's the angle she was going for. But it was going to collapse regardless as soon as those text messages and correspondences and videos and FOIAs showed up into the ether. So, you know what I mean? That would have collapsed very quickly. Another reason why Mike Stanfield made sure this case did not get brought to trial. Because even if they went with the whole Shabuse narrative, this stuff would have been very damning. And you know what I mean? I can't even fault Mike Stanfield for doing this, but it's just like at the end of the day, you got to look at it morally. Like legally, yeah, it was pretty genius, but morally, it's just like, I think the playing field should have been leveled. If you're going to get Gypsy off being her the mastermind, why not get Nick off too? He wasn't the mastermind. He was just the muscle. He was, hired and coordinated into this essentially. So let's see what else it says. And you can disagree with me on that. There's no problems with that. We can agree to disagree. There's, it's either one or two things I think it should happen. I think, if you want a fair sentencing or you want a fair outcome for this whole case, it should have been either Gypsy stays in prison along with him or Nick also gets a second chance. And that doesn't mean right now necessarily. I think it should be determined by, like the same with Gypsy, a parole board, maybe a psych evaluation. However, she had paths to getting out. She had a process and paths, to get onto parole. I think he should be given the same grace. It's like, why for one and not the other? It doesn't matter if one was the muscle. In fact, Gypsy played more of a role, because if you take her out of the equation, this never would have happened. If you took Nick out of the equation, someone else probably would have ended up doing it, if not her herself, because she tried that once with a BB Pew Pew that she thought was a real Pew Pew. So it's not like she hadn't tried taking this into her own hands prior. So do with that what you will. Okay, she adds, my mom hardly ever cussed, especially around people. Okay, not sure what relevance that has, but anyway. So that's what I put to seem alarming, so the authorities could go and find her, and then she could be given a burial. Okay, once again, I don't buy that at all. If you wanted the police to find the body, all you had to do was call the police anonymously and tell them where the body is. Tenfold. No, you made this look like whoever was there and did this left the messages on there or left it from somewhere else, and it sounds like, it was going to be pinned on Nick, whether they got caught or not, or in the event that they get caught. So I think it was just her trying to find it. Or maybe some boogeyman came in there and, Nick and Gypsy weren't even there when it happened. So, coincidentally, I think that was the initial story they were trying to go with. I was being kicked out of the house kind of thing. And, once that collapsed, Nick, told the truth from start to finish. I haven't seen evidence of the contrary. The only one lying through her teeth was Gypsy. And she continued to lie, not only to all the investigators, but to her own lawyers and to Rod and Christie. And again, if the Shabuse stuff was true, she would have said something about it. But there's nothing. The only time that came into play was when her lawyers came into play. And initially, she even lied to them. So it's just amazing. It's amazing that it ended up in the place that it did. On the evening, I can't read the top there. I can't see it on my phone anyway. Once her mother had fallen asleep, John got a cab round to their house and demanded that Gypsy gave him a poking weapon. No, Gypsy went out and bought that herself and gave it to him. I don't think he demanded anything. I think they both came up with the idea and coordinated it. And Gypsy made sure that wanted to get done because, again, she went and I think she stole it, actually, at a Walmart, something that her and Dee Dee did quite often, apparently. And, again, they even mailed it. She even mailed it to the Nick's house. I forget exactly why. They were going to bury it or something. I don't know. It was a very shoddy crime altogether. A lot of, especially when you're going to post from social media and there's an IP address attached to it. I don't know what Gypsy was thinking, that, it was some kind of stealth mode and it just came from some kind of boogeyman. They're going to know where that was typed and the IP address it was involved with. But I don't think she was thinking about that. Once again, just because Just because she was a dumb criminal doesn't mean she wasn't one at all. She says, I hand him the pokey poke, and he said, get your bleeping butt to the bathroom. Okay. So I go to the bathroom, I close the door, and I lock the door behind me, and I just kind of get into the fetal position and I cover my ears. Okay. Again, I think she did that. This is just my opinion. I think she did that as a safety net. That way, in the unlikely event that somehow Dee Dee overpowers Nick, or Nick kind of, cowers out of this whole thing, she could hide in the bathroom and saying, oh my God, my boyfriend busted in here and wanted to unalive us, get him out of here. But once again, all you had to do was look into Nick's phone, her phone, and show that this was a coordinated effort. And that whole hiding in the bathroom in the fetal position thing was just her trying to distance herself from any type of guilt and trying to adopt a victimhood narrative as fast as possible. So, you know what I mean? That's my common sense approach on that. And she goes on. So I go to the bath. Okay, I got that. I was so focused on trying to breathe and block it out. And I just remember one sharp scream and then nothing after that. I mean, yeah, a really brutal crime that you masterminded and put together and planned over 2 years was, taking effect at that point. What else did you think you were going to hear? Nick and Dee Dee playing cards together? Nick and Dee Dee sharing a bottle of wine? No. It's going to be a pretty brutal crime. And once again, it's just like, if you were so scared of this man, you had no problem leaving with him. You have no problem going to his parents' house. You didn't ask for any sort of help. Again, it's just like, yeah. There's too many angles of this that she has inconsistently put out into, the ether that don't make any sense. Everything contradicts itself. Nick was used instrumentally into this crime, especially with him being with level 2 autism. That should have been textbook mitigation in a court of law, and for some reason it wasn't, and I'll never understand that. And it goes on. She revealed that Godejohn had ordered her to greet him naked after the murder and said he wanted comforting before schmectrally shashalting her. Okay, no, I don't think so. Especially when we take a look at something like, for example, the Brownie video and all the hotel room stuff. It doesn't sound like she was being assaulted in there. And also, Gypsy has stated on multiple occasions that basically Nick was impotent. He could barely build a tower, and usually rapists with those sort of tendencies and with the power and the control and everything that goes behind someone that would do something like that, you figured the very bare minimum of having something like that take place would be getting a stiffy, and he could barely do that. So again, that doesn't fit any of Gypsy's statements or claims, even if you were to believe them, because you can't have it both ways. You can't say this man was such a rapist, he was out of his mind, but then say, well, the guy could barely get it up. So again, we have to turn our world sideways and upside down to believe both of Gypsy's narratives at the same time, because one does not go with the other. You can't have this both ways. Gypsy served 7 years of her sentence, and on 20th of December 2023, she was granted, great spelling there, the son, early parole from the Chillicothe Correctional Center. Following Gypsy's release, she has welcomed a baby daughter with her boyfriend Ken Euchre. They welcomed their daughter Aurora Reyna in December 2024. Gypsy says Gypsy says that having her own children has put her childhood into perspective. Well, child, not children so far. She says, she was 2 weeks old. I was rocking the recliner. I looked at her and something hit me. Okay, well, yeah, usually when you're experiencing, but at the same time, she makes a really good case as to why she shouldn't have even thrust herself into motherhood, because every time she does something extremely stupid on one of the platforms, whether it's TikTok or what have you, she's like, well, even Ken has done this, saying like, well, she doesn't have the mind of a regular 32-year-old, and she didn't get to experience this, and she didn't get to experience that, basically like trying to put this whole sheltered narrative in there. It's like, so why is she having children if she doesn't even know who she herself is yet? Is that really a responsible thing to do? Shouldn't you actually get to know yourself first? But no, she was ready to get herself knocked up ASAP, especially, after her, obsession of Ken coming back into her life was happening. Because I'm telling you, when I heard about Ken coming back into her life, that's all I thought it was at first. But when I heard that she was pregnant, it's like I literally found out about the pregnancy before I even knew they were back together. That's how fast it happened. So Gypsy made sure she got knocked up with a vengeance to make sure Ken was not getting away as easy as he did last time. Because once again, I always believed that her obsession with Ken comes from the fact that he had the ability to say no, unlike some of the other people that Gypsy has chosen in the past, most notably Ryan Anderson and Nicholas Godejohn, men with extreme low self-esteem and low self-worth. Perfect targets for people like her. Felt like I was going through trauma all over again by thinking to myself, how can a parent cause harm to any child? And I just started to cry. Again, it's the credibility issues I have with Gypsy. And at this point, anything that relates to her ever-changing stories requires some sort of documentation or corroboration, because she herself admits, and has always admitted, that she is a pathological liar. So when it comes to that, I believe her. Now, a decade on from her arrest, Gypsy is hoping to extend her family and launch her own podcast. Yeah, she already launched one episode. It didn't get much traction. It's extremely boring, and she glorifies going to prison. Like, compares prison to college. I mean, I don't know. It's just weird. I don't have much more to say about it. She says, this podcast is going to be real conversations about people who have gone through trauma but also have been defined by the worst moments in their life. So basically, she is upset with the fact that she's known for being a schmurderer and she doesn't like it. Well, what can you do? When you do something and participate in something that has a profound effect on someone, like taking their entire life, especially the life of your mother, yeah, people are going to remember you for that. It's not like we remember Gypsy or no Gypsy from something else, like being talented at anything. She doesn't, sing. She doesn't, play any music. She doesn't, she's not an actress. She doesn't play sports. She's not a content creator. Again, it's just like, Gypsy is trying to skew some narrative that people should just come out and praise her and just forget about the schmurder thing, when that's never going to go away. And I think people like Gypsy, who still have yet to take accountability, and anyone with schmurder on the record, are going to be defined by that, because you ruined many lives and ended a life permanently. The person that brought you into the world. And that's just how it's going to be seen. It's common sense. Something like that is going to define you, no matter how much you wish it didn't. I hate to say it, but that's, how people are going to view you, especially when the lack of accountability factor is in there. So once again, Gypsy, it's not our fault that you're not taking proper accountability. It's a self-reflection issue, and now once again, you're trying to deflect and blame again that, hey, we should not be defined by the worst moments in our life, and people are defining me. They're putting me in that box. It's just like, well, again, I think it's the lack of accountability issue that people have the biggest issue with. But if you sit there and this is the second podcast she's made, by the way, this is not something new. And I'm not sure if you guys remember, but the first podcast she did, she was facing towards the left, like as if she was speaking to somebody that was talking to her, and there was nobody there. She was just talking, pretending to look at somebody as if they were interviewing her. But she was basically interviewing herself, looking at an empty chair or something like that. Just a bizarre aesthetic for a quote podcast. But again, this is another quote rebranding on YouTube. Again, I can't even count the amount of rebrands that Gypsy has tried to do. But at the end of the day, it's like, she's not a quality content creator. She's not talented at anything. She's basically going to throw as much as she can against the wall, hoping something sticks. And so far, nothing really has. Everyone's watching Gypsy for the same reason, at least for the majority, I think. I'm pretty sure. And it's because everyone likes to watch a good train wreck. And so far, she's provided plenty of content regarding that, and continues to do so. So again, this is not about necessarily the definition of the worst moments in your life, but it does especially highlight that moment of your life when you're grifting off of it and making money off of it. And that's why I've been listening to, of course, I've been talking about Mackenzie Shirilla lately. Big Sister Unhinged, Christina Russo is trying to, get Dominic's Law into place, where it's like basically an extension of the Son of Sam law, where convicts and murderers should not be able to monetize or make money off of their crimes. I think that should be federal. That should not be just a state thing or certain states participating. It's not just something that should be done, ethically, but morally as well. Like no convict, whether they're still behind bars or not, should be able to monetize themselves based off of their crime and based off of the notoriety of their crime. That should never be allowed. Do I want to take their free speech away and their First Amendment rights? No, but it's different when you're making money off of it. That's where I have a problem with it. So, anyways, that's the end of this. I'll catch you guys later.